You start a track, you finally get a track that you like, you're jamming out, you made your 8-bar loop, it sounds dope, you're hyped on it, you film it, you post it on Instagram, and then what happens? You get stuck because you don't know what to do, you close the project, it goes in the graveyard. If this sounds familiar to you, then you are in the right place, my friend, because today I'm going to show you a way out of the 8-bar loop. You can get out of it. These are methods that I've been taught and developed over the years after being that guy who just kept making those loops and throwing them away. And so they're super beneficial. They work every single time and they work across any genre. So let's hop into it. So here we have a pretty generic, pretty basic trap loop. So we got a little drum groove going on here. We have our little melody, our top line, and then we have a bass line is pretty much what we're at here. So rule number 1 of getting out of the 8-bar loop is repurpose your melody or a part of the track and kind of dress it up in a different way. And in doing so, you're keeping the track cohesive and you're also introducing something new and something changing. Let me show you what I mean here. So we have our kind of pluck here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to straight up duplicate this. I duplicated it and I put the MIDI on a completely new instrument. Then what I did is I duplicated the MIDI again, brought it down here, and I stretched it out. So I doubled the time by 3. So it's really just this first little part here of this melody. And then I pitched it down 2 octaves. So now it's kind of like a bassy kind of sound. And so what I'm getting at, and really the takeaway from this technique for getting out of the 8-bar loop, is anytime you take the melody or your main idea of the track and repurpose it in a million different ways, it's always going to sound cohesive and it's always going to get you out of the 8-bar loop. This, in and of itself, is kind of what music is. Anytime you have a track, you only need one good idea, and that's something that a lot of people miss, is that once you have your 8-bar loop, you essentially have your track. You just have to arrange it out. So in this example, what I did is we had our melody, I repurposed it, again, slowed it down by 3 times, pitched it down an octave, duplicated it, put it on a different sort of instrument, and then I'm gonna duplicate over the drums. And what I did on here, on the second part of this first melody, is I added some drum variation. Because what we wanna do no matter what is we always wanna keep it evolving and moving in some sort of way. Fine for me, like a good rule of thumb is 2 bars of kind of the same melody with some drum variations, or it can be variations of anything. It can be variations in the melody, can be variations in the effect. And then we switch it up and then we essentially use the same melody, but in a different way. So we're kind of reintroducing it in a new way to the listener. So let's kind of take a listen to what we got here. So we essentially just made a complete second bar for this. And now that we're this far, I mean, what do we have? We have a full 16-bar loop. We can duplicate this, we can play with it a little bit more. And then literally for like me and my production, I will reuse this idea again and again, and I can create an entire track off it. So now we have this part here. We have this little kind of 4-bar melody. So now we took this and we duplicated it, we made this respace. This is perfect for like a break. So say we have 16 bars, say we have 2 of these and we made a couple different variations. Now we're going to come into like a break. And once again, we're going to pick another piece of this melody and we're going to repurpose it. Now you might be asking yourself, how can we make these transitions more cohesive? And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So one major way, which works every time, is subtle white noise sweep. But it's just really subtle white noise, ideally a longer one like this. And anytime we're doing a change, we're going to make one of these, we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to reverse it. And then we're going to turn this way down because this is going to be like a very subtle effect. So we have that kind of eases any sort of transition, and we can shorten these, lengthen them, do whatever we want. Like maybe right here, we'll put a kind of quick one. The longer the sweep, the bigger of a transition, and the shorter the sweep, the kind of smaller of a transition. And now right here, we're coming from our kind of like verse, if you will, into this break. And what I like to do in places like this is wash out or reverb throws, and that really kind of eases the transition. So what I'm gonna do is I'm coming to my main track and I'm gonna use bass clefs, easy washout. This I believe is free. If it's not, it's super cheap. And I'm going to automate a washout into the next transition. And this gives like a big kind of reverb throw. And this kind of disguises the fact that we're changing the elements here. And you'll kind of be able to hear what I'm saying. So that again eases the transition, and then off kind of our main mid, let's go ahead and do kind of like a delay throw. So again, we're kind of easing out these elements and bringing in the next one. So I'm gonna come here and we're gonna automate a delay on. Turn this on kind of the last part here. We kind of just let it fade out. So we're gonna do kind of a throw with the dry wet here. So that leads us to something like this. And then we go back into it, and essentially now here what we have is we have 16 bars, we have a nice break. We can go ahead and duplicate this, make some changes. Now we have 32 bars. Again, we have a nice little break into 32 bars. And from here, all I would really do is come in and make these micro adjustments. So another thing I like to do is go and layer instruments in different parts. So like we've already given the listeners all this in the first half. Maybe on the second half on this pluck here, what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll kind of do like a layer. So maybe we'll add just like a little subtle layer here. And then I would go in and do some reverb throws, some effects and whatnot. But I mean, we basically took this little melody we had to begin with, and then we arranged it into an entire track. So this is probably the most powerful way of getting out of an 8-bar loop. There are some other techniques we're going to cover. So the next thought process that I have for basically expanding on an 8-bar loop is if something sounds good over the loop, it's going to sound good by itself in the next section. And I'll show you what I mean. So what I did here is, remember, in music theory, we're staying in the same notes. So that's kind of like our theme. As long as we're staying in the key, which in this situation is F, it's not going to sound dissonant. So I know that our track's in F, and I see here that a common theme is F to F sharp with this kind of B flat down step here. So what I did is I just did this little melody that isn't this melody repurposed at all. It's its own thing, just using the same key on top of it. And so what I'm saying is rhythmically it's on beat. So it kind of matches the beat and we know it's in key. So because this sounds good over the existing loop, we know it's going to sound great detached and by itself in the next section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. And now we're leaving all the rest of this behind. So we're going to a new section, some new material here. I'm going to duplicate our drums over. So like we talked about in the previous example, using like white noise risers and reverb swells is a great way to ease transitions. Another way is to kind of slowly edge something in. So instead of all of a sudden introducing something super aggressively, we're going to kind of edge this in. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an auto filter. And a good way to think about this is if someone's further away from you, so if I'm standing like 100 feet away and I'm talking, it's going to sound muffled. And the reason for that is because low frequencies travel further than high frequency, and they travel in all directions, whereas high frequencies travel in one direction. So basically what that means is if something's further away, what's going to tell your ears it's further away is if the higher frequencies are missing. So if we put an auto filter and we reduce the high frequencies and we slowly bring them in, it's going to make it sound like the sound is slowly coming closer to you until it's all the way in. So we're going to edge this in with an auto filter, kind of find a good transition here. And then I'm coming here on the other part and I'm going to do the exact opposite. So this one's coming to the front and this one's getting pushed in the back. And this one's going to be very subtle and it's going to kind of clear the way for this other one that's coming in. So basically what I'm getting at in this technique is if something sounds good over something, then it's going to sound good on its own in the next section. So for such a long time, I had such a big problem where I would try to like get out of the 8-bar loop and create the next section, and I would be working in the next section. And the transition would come and it would just sound totally off and it would sound like a new song and it just would frustrate me. So this is a great way. So rule number 2 would be if it sounds good on top of the existing loop, it's going to sound good on its own. So the third and final technique we're going to talk about as far as getting out of the 8-bar loop would be transitioning to a different section. So we already kind of touched on some of these techniques, but we're going to kind of take a deep dive into them and I'll show you what I mean. So we have our 8-bar loop here. Say for the next section, so let's say we're doing like a verse chorus kind of deal. So now we're going to transition. We're going to have to decide how are we going to create a chorus that's going to be cohesive with this. Well, based on what we already know, we know that we want to use the same notes and the same rhythms to kind of keep on beat and keep the track going. So let's see how we could do that with some chords. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this MIDI over here, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at what notes are playing. Change this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start deleting notes. So I'm going to keep like every quarter note almost, kind of randomly. So now I'm going to legato these, so extend them all the way out. So now again, we've used the repurpose method of playing off this. So we grabbed this, we deleted pretty much every note except for kind of like the start of a series here, extended them out into chords. So all I did was stack notes on top of them. So I used the key we're in and stacked thirds on top of them. And now I'm going to duplicate this. And this one I'm going to arpeggiate. So I'm going to kind of create like a rhythm with this one. Cool. So once again, we repurposed it. We grabbed this, we put an arpeggiator on it, pitched it up an octave, panned it a little bit, and now we have this transition that's probably going to sound pretty smooth. So this is a lot similar to the previous two. What we're doing in this example though is we're using these elements again to repurpose them and to create different sections with them. So now coming into whatever kind of section you want to call this, we're now creating chords and arpeggios with it. This is now creating our arrangement. So now instead of just a verse part with a melody, now we have some chords. We have a nice kind of chorus section, if you will. So use these 3 techniques and you're absolutely sure to get out of your 8-bar loop. You may have to do some experimenting and see what works with your particular track. A lot of pitching up and down, trying different voicings, trying different instruments, doubling and having the MIDI, and then just taking the notes and repurposing them in different ways. And again, if it's over it and it sounds good, you're on point. If you're using the same notes, it's going to be on point. One last thing I'm going to point out is if you're in Ableton 12, all these different MIDI sections here is actually going to help you do this automatically. So we have things like rhythm where we can increase this and it's going to create like a bass line for us. So you could literally just come in here and play with these and it will actually create something that's cohesive. It's going to kind of do exactly what I just said automatically of using and repurposing the same notes, but in different articulations, different rhythms, and so on and so forth. So I really hope this was helpful for you guys in learning how to kind of get out of that 8-bar loop and some good ideas for finishing your tracks. Thank you guys for watching and I'll see you next time.